We are in the last of the 3 years of our lectionary cycle. This is the year of Luke, and this is a Sunday where we get a story that isn't just Luke's take on it, it's unique to Luke. We get the story of the prodigal son. And sometimes when we have a story that is so familiar to us, we can sometimes miss the opportunity to learn perhaps something new out of a text that is familiar to us. The story as we have it, we know it begins with the younger son of a landowner who says, I would like my inheritance now, and if you could give it to me. It's a little aggressive, you might say, as far as basically saying, I kind of wish you were dead so that I could have the inheritance now and just go my way. And the father strangely agrees to this. So the story starts out in a way that as the audience, those who are listening to the story would have gone, well, this story isn't going quite the way I would have expected. And the younger son goes off, blows all the money, finds himself feeding pigs, not something that your young Jewish boy would aspire to be doing, and he knows that things are not going well. So he thinks to himself, I'm going to work on this speech. I'm going to go home because the hired hands that my father has that work in the fields are treated better than what I'm experiencing right now. So I'm going to come to my father and tell him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and you. I am no longer worthy to be considered your son. Please take me on like one of your hired hands. So he's got this speech in mind. You can kind of picture he's practicing as he makes his way back to the household. And there is this other strange image of what happens. We can picture what would have been classic robes to wear, and the father sees him from a distance, which gives a little bit of the impression of having been keeping an eye out for, perhaps. But you can picture the father hiking up robes and dashing down the lane to greet the young son that he thought had been lost forever. Now, in my growing up years, the number of times I saw my dad in a flat-out run it's a pretty small number of scenarios. Chased by a dog. Yeah, there weren't many, right? So there's a sense of kind of, where is this man's dignity? Has he no shame? This son that has probably made him the laughing stock of his community has come back, and even at that point, he dashes out, throwing dignity to the wind, and greets his son, who's pulled out his 3x5 card and said, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. And you notice he doesn't get the rest of the speech out. The father won't have it. The father grabs him, pulls him in, and says, we are going to celebrate. The one who was lost has been found. My son who was dead is alive. And that's largely when we think of the story of the Good Samaritan. That's kind of the core of the story. We know there's more to it. We know that, but that's kind of, when we think of it, that's kind of the quick summary, right? Son comes back, everybody celebrates, except we know not everybody does, but that's kind of the main piece of it. But one of the things that struck me whenever we read one of the parables from Jesus is that sometimes it's helpful to put our feet in the shoes of the people who aren't great people in the parables. And as an older brother myself, it's always good when there's an older brother in the story, even if the younger brother has it coming, but that's probably a longer sermon than we need for today. But nonetheless, you get the idea. The older brother, there's a lot going on there. He's angry, the younger brother gets everything. We get all of that, right? But there's a lot of things that I think we've missed in previous cycles. The older son comes in from the field to the house. House. Not returning home, he's coming to the house. At a distance, he runs into people and he says, "What's going on?" You can see from a distance that it's kind of a beehive of activity. What's going on? And they say, "Your younger brother has come home. Your father is celebrating. The fatted calf has been killed. There's going to be a festive day and dinner." All kinds of excitement, which we know the older son is not super excited about this, right? He goes up to his father and just lays into him. Now, think of the shame of that. That's not how you deal with your father. The father has had one son say, "I wish you were dead, give me my inheritance," dashing out into the street to go grab him. Now he's got his older son yelling at him and telling him what for. There's all this kind of angst going on. But what's interesting to me in the reading of it this year is that the younger son does not in many ways doubt his place in the home. He knows that he is the son. In fact, his speech that he's been practicing kind of assumes that in the first step. "I know I am your son, but don't treat me like that anymore because I don't deserve it." Now, how does the older brother behave? The older brother starts not with, "I know I am loved and have a place in this household." He says, "I have worked like a slave for you. I have worked like a slave for you." The older son's view of the world is that his place in that household is because of his labor. It is because of his work. "I have a place here like the slaves have a place here, because I work hard." Now, if we read the text, we can see all of the joy that appears to bring to the older brother, right? Not a whole lot of joy. Not a whole lot of joy. It causes a radical shift in the worldview of the older brother. "I deserve to be here regardless because of the strength of my hands. And no one else deserves to be here unless they have also worked." There is an entire worldview here that as Lutheran Christians we want to say, where's the grace? Where is the place in the household simply because you have been made a member of the family? We see these two sons, and we can imagine the trajectory that they might go from that place. The younger son, potentially with a sense of joy, being incredulous that their place in the household has been restored purely by love and grace. A life that would spin from that moment, a life that would be characterized by gratitude for things that were undeserved and unearned. The older brother, not so much. A sense of bitterness, a sense of constantly trying to understand who deserves this, who deserves to be here, and all determined by labor, work. You must earn the Father's love. What is that trajectory? A trajectory of jealousy, bitterness, anger, not a lot of joy, not a lot of hope, not a lot of looking around at others as siblings. But the older son all but identifies himself as a slave in the household and not a son, an heir. I think that's a challenge for us, this sense of openness to receive God's grace. a sense of setting aside our resumes in this life to say, not so much I'm a great and awesome person because I've done all these great and awesome things, but that we simply begin by remembering our baptism, that we are children of God, period. And that is the end of the story, allowing us to live lives of gratitude. I think the challenge, perhaps a small thing, but echoing themes from the first reading today, the idea of the people coming into the Holy Land and the manna disappearing when their crops come, the idea that a place is now a home. And in the prodigal son returns home, a place that for the older son is simply a house. So I think as we reflect on these readings, these are worldviews that affect how we see one another, our neighbors, anyone else, as to whether they have earned or deserved, as opposed to a recognition of understanding God's love for us that begins and ends all discussions about our own worth and the worth of others. Amen.